There's rising anger in Egypt as the interim government continues its crackdown on protesters. 21 women and girls were recently sentenced to 11 years in prison for taking part in demonstrations. Will this new approach bring stability, or could the tough new rules backfire? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme with me, David Foster. Egypt may be on the verge of a new chapter in its post-Mubarak protest movement. In cities across the country, Egyptians have taken to the streets after Friday prayers in defiance of a new law that bans protests which haven't been sanctioned by the police. Protesters apparently galvanised by a number of recent harsh jail terms dished out to people involved in demonstrations. Dominic Kane reports now on the latest case, 21 women and girls who've been sentenced to 11 years each.
Abir Youssef looks through her daughter Sarah's bedroom. Sarah is 19. On Thursday, she should have been attending classes at university. Instead, she was starting an 11-year prison sentence. Abir says Sarah has always been conscientious and loved to draw and sketch. So, for Abir, the news of Sarah's conviction has been like a body blow.
When we heard the verdict yesterday, this verdict was very shocking, very tough, and very unjust. My daughter was telling me today from prison, "Mom, I'm 19 years old. After 11 years when I get out of prison, I'll be 30 years old. You can't imagine how much hurt hearing those words caused me."
Sarah was one of 21 women and girls found guilty by courts in Alexandria of a series of charges, including thuggery, illegal gathering, and damage of property. They had formed a human chain during protests against the military-led government several weeks ago. Mahmoud Gaber is a lawyer representing the women and girls. He says he believes the case has been politicized, and the facts clearly show his clients are innocent.
There
is no evidence at all in the papers of the lawsuit against my clients. From the moment they were arrested, through the investigation until the judge announced the verdict and the sentence, there is not one eyewitness saying these women committed these crimes.
Human rights groups have condemned both the trial and the sentences, and say Egypt must do away with laws and punishments more reflective of the old Egypt.
This sentence has been given under an old law, an old law from 1923, so it's not even the newly adopted law that we at Human Rights Watch, but also other human rights groups, have considered extremely restrictive. Now, this is all to be seen in the larger framework of a lot of restrictions imposed on the right of people to protest in a country that for the past 3 years has changed a lot of things thanks to protests.
In recent weeks, both the government and the courts have clamped down on protests. Just over a week ago, 12 students from the Eltahawy University were jailed for 17 years each for attempting to storm the headquarters of the institution. This week has seen the imposition of a new law to regulate protests, which has drawn widespread opposition from political groups. But the government says it will strictly implement the new law, which it says protects the rights of both protesters and the ordinary citizen.
The severity of the sentences given to the women and girls in Alexandria and to the students in Azhar University has shocked many people here and led them to question the independence of Egypt's judiciary. Dominic Kane, Al Jazeera, Cairo.
Well, Egypt's military-backed government has become increasingly intolerant of dissent. On Thursday, police arrested Alaa Abdel Fattah, a leading figure of the 2011 uprising, for calling for protests in defiance of the new law that restricts demonstrations. That was after 12 students were jailed for 17 years each for taking part in protests at Cairo's Eltahawy University in October. Well, since President Morsi was deposed, the government has mounted a major crackdown on his supporters, killing hundreds and arresting thousands. Critics saying the government has failed, though, to investigate the deaths of protesters or hold perpetrators accountable. And all of these arrests come at a time when the interim government is facing criticism for trying people under military tribunals. Well, let us bring in our guests now. In Cairo, Reda Botros, Professor of Political Science at Helwan University in London, Diana Eltahawy from Amnesty International, and joining us on Skype from Cairo, Wael Abbas, a blogger and a journalist, himself the subject of a number of arrests during the 2011 revolution. Well, let me come to you first. Did you think these days were over?
I don't know. I really don't know. But we are living the worst time in the revolution so far. The old regime is coming back with a vengeance, and we are seeing people killed in the streets brutally, and we are seeing silence from the international community and from the media and from the human rights organizations. And we are seeing people, students killed inside their own universities at the hands of the police. So I don't know what to say about the days that we're passing through these days.
Okay, Reda Botros, let me come to you. Is it possible that the judiciary is being influenced by the government here? Is it possible it is still independent?
Let's look at the bigger picture here. The bigger picture is Egypt is facing terrorism, a surge of terrorism. More than 320 policemen died in the last 4 months. Well,
I'm going to bring you back to the question I wanted answered, which is about the independence of the judiciary. But since you mention a surge of terrorism,
picture I'm talking about.
Since you mention a surge of terrorism in your words, when you saw those young women and girls in their white prison uniforms, wearing their hijabs as well, and looking probably, you know, less than their age, most of them looking as though they were under 20, did you see terrorists there?
As a father of 2 girls, I would say I sympathize with the young girls, but we have to respect the rule of law. Now, we don't question the court rulings unless we hear what about them. Now, I personally wouldn't comment on the sentence unless I read the details of the ruling. The ruling might reveal something else than what I saw, but the surge of terrorism, it's evident. I mean, you can't deny that Egypt is facing terrorism. This is an exceptional case. Would you like Egypt to continue in this chaotic situation? If you call the world would care for the rule of law. Where is the rule of law here? When the law says something.
Okay, well, let me ask you this.
International community
What about the rule of law?
No.
What about the rule of law that sees these women, these girls, sentenced to 11 years when there are 2 policemen currently out on bail who were given 7 years for beating to death Khalid Said, again in Alexandria, and another police officer was given 3 years for shooting protesters in the eye with birdshot. How can you put those two side by side and say this is fair?
In both cases, the two cases, the policemen were sentenced to jail. I mean, in your country,
but 7 years and 3 years, not 11 years.
This is court rulings. This is court rulings. You cannot comment on court rulings. This is against the law. This is a clear violation of the law. If you want the rule of law, don't comment on this is not the executive authority. You can criticize all the time, but this is the judiciary.
Okay, let me go to Diana. We'll be back with you, Mr. Botros, in just a moment. Wael was making the point that the international community has abandoned the in quotes, revolutionaries, and he talked about human rights groups as well. But Amnesty's been pretty strong in condemning these sentences and the bigger picture. So do you feel there has been a lack of sympathy recently with those who've taken to the streets, apart from what you're saying?
Well, Amnesty International has actually said that these women and girls should have never been arrested in the first place, let alone sentenced to 11 years in prison. They're participating in a peaceful protest. And in general, we're very concerned about the setback that we have seen in the past year in the human rights situation in Egypt. As you've mentioned, yesterday there is an arrest of one of the most prominent activists and lawyers that is known for not actually sympathizing with the Muslim Brotherhood. So we see that the crackdown and the repression of the Egyptian authorities are spreading beyond the supporters of the deposed President Mohammed Morsi. Indeed, the successive Egyptian governments have been using the same tools of repression. So whether it's restrictive legislation, whether it's abuses by security forces in killing and injuring protesters, to crack down on dissent in all of its forms. 2 days ago, we saw 24 prisoners of conscience being arrested during a peaceful protest against the use of military trials against civilians. They're in jail until today on hunger strike. So we've clearly seen that this current Egyptian government is using the same tactics used in the past, whether it's under the rule of Mohammed Morsi or the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces, or Hosni Mubarak. And this is because nobody has been punished for such human rights violations. There have been no serious reforms of the security services, and we're seeing a cycle of violations continuing and continuing regardless of who is actually ruling Egypt.
Diana Eltahawy will be back in just a moment, but Mr. Botros, Mr. Wael, I'm going to read to each one of you in turn a quote, and I'd like your comments on it. Mr. Wael, first. This was from somebody in the crowd during a protest on Wednesday night. We are right back where we were in 2011 and we'll just have to start again from scratch. Is that the way you feel?
Well, I feel even worse that we are back in the 80s or in the 90s, when there was this call of war on terror and that this country is facing terrorism, and we should violate all rights and all laws in order to fight this terrorism and justify injustices done to female protesters. Some of them are minors, and violating the law.
I'm sorry, but I suppose what this protester was saying was that the events of 2011 in many ways have had to be cast aside, that there hasn't been an effective revolution, and if you want one, you're going to have another one now.
Definitely, we need to start one that is much stronger, and we should do the reforms ourselves. We shouldn't lean on the military to do the reforms. We should not shout the army and the people are on one hand again. We should not trust the Islamists taking over by democratic elections. We should avoid all these mistakes that we've done before and start all over again.
Okay, well, Mr. Botros, also in Cairo, this was another protester saying there will be a third wave of the revolution, much more violent than before. We're witnessing a turning point. Your thoughts on that?
I quietly believe him, simply because there are groups of people here are so much keen and so much interested in continuing on the chaotic situation in Egypt. They don't want to see Egypt stabilized country, because as you could see that all the countries went through the Arab Spring, what was called Arab Spring in 2011, are having chaotic situation and cannot get out of this chaotic situation, because this is the vicious circle. When things are stabilizing, when a government is trying to implement the law, now they want to continue on with this. For what? Your question might be, for what? What reason? The reason is that there are some powers, world powers, are so much keen to do this. There are theories of doing this, and there are material evidence that they are financing those NGOs who create this chaotic situation, and much more interested to aggravate the problem and keep it sustainable all the time.
I think it's fair to say that you were very disappointed with the 2011 revolution and supported Hosni Mubarak during the elections the previous year, which saw him returned to power. So what I'm wondering is do you think that that is what Egyptians value above all? Some kind of calm, some kind of normality, even if there is, in quotes, repression?
No, Egyptians want equality, want rule of law, want justice, want freedom. So all those things were the something called after the 2011 revolution. However, what ended up was something else other than the 2011 revolution. It came out with the autocratic regime by the Muslim Brotherhood who suppressed Egyptians. That's why they had another wave of the 2011 revolution.
Are they getting justice and freedom now?
We are on the way, and they don't want those who inspired the violence from 2011 till 2012. They want this to continue on because they don't want Egypt to be a stabilized country, to be a stable country, I mean. So that's an evil plan. I mean, as a politician, as a professor of political science, I mean, this is like already known among all practitioners or observers, political observers.
Diana Eltahawy.
It's not something new.
Diana Eltahawy, let me ask you this. Until very recently, it appeared that most of the arrests were directed at supporters of Mohamed Morsi, the anti-coup alliance, those people who were orchestrating those kind of demonstrations. But now we're seeing, for example, Abdel Fattah arrested, secular people who were involved in the original revolution also now being targeted. Do you notice a change in direction for the authoritarianism from the military-led government?
Well, it's fairly ironic that a government that has come at the back of popular protests has issued a piece of legislation that essentially bans opposition protests against the Ministry of Interior wide discretionary powers, not only to prevent protests from happening, but actually also from dispersing them using force even if they're peaceful. And we've seen this law being implemented already in the past few days. Abdel Fattah is one example, but there are dozens of other examples, other activists that were beyond those who were supporting the pro-Morsi camp have been arrested on the day of the anniversary of the Mohammed Mahmoud protests, which were commemorating the killings of scores of protesters years ago at the hands of the same security forces. And that's really at the heart of the concern. If no one has been punished since the time of Hosni Mubarak for arresting protesters arbitrarily, for torturing them, for killing them, we will see this cycle continuing again. The recent testimonies that Amnesty International collected from protesters that were arrested, whether they're supporting of the Muslim Brotherhood or not, where that really the same tactics were used. They're beaten by batons, women dragged by their hair, they're dragged on the ground, and all of this with complete impunity.
Yeah, well, Wael, can there therefore be another peaceful revolution, or does it have to resort, as that commentator out on the streets the other night said, to a more violent one than before? Can it be peaceful?
The current regime, with its police and with its military force, is making sure that it's not gonna be peaceful. But after killing all those people, after all these violations of their protester rights on the streets, killing them at point blank, killing them inside their universities, I don't expect anything to be peaceful. They are dealing with peaceful protests, just like the one that was outside the Shura Council, with violence. They arrested people. They are going to fabricate charges against them. They are going to say that they have knives, they have weapons.
Yeah, well, this is a point. This is a point that was raised by Mr. Botros, and I'd care to get him to comment. You believe, Mr. Botros, that there have not since 2011, perhaps before, there hasn't been non-violent protests?
Yes. Since 2011 till now, there wasn't a single demonstration that did not create violence or result in casualties. Human casualty or real estate.
And whose fault was that?
Casualties. Now, there is what we call here in Egypt, in one of the literature of Egyptian politics, we say it's the third party. Now, we discovered very recently that who is the third party, which is the Muslim Brotherhood. Usually, peaceful protesters used to go peacefully and chant peaceful chanting, then all of a sudden it turns violent. Why it turns violent? Because of the others start shooting the two cases. shooting the police and shooting demonstrators. Casualties of both.
Okay, Diana Eltahawy, Amnesty takes a lot of evidence from a lot of witnesses. What have you been hearing about the kind of problems that have arisen at these demonstrations?
I mean, Amnesty International has monitored many demonstrations since 2011 and spoke to many witnesses visiting hospitals and morgues as well. Even though in some cases some protesters use violence, but in many other cases the authorities disperse peaceful protests without warning, and even when they can disperse protests legitimately, they still use excessive and lethal force, killing those protesters that are not posing any dangers to them. If we're speaking about the
what Mr.
recent
Botros
protests,
is saying is that there are agitators. He says there are agitators at every demonstration.
I mean, if I can just give the example of the recent protest in front of the Shura Council on Tuesday, which led to the arrest of dozens of protesters and 24 of them still being in detention. That protest was not violent. None of the protesters had used violence at all. The same was true in terms of the protest in Alexandria, of which now we see the sentencing of the 14 women and 7 girls to 11 years in prison for the women, and the girls have to stay until they're 21 in a juvenile detention facility.
Which sort of brings us during this discussion.
There was no violence used by the protesters either. There was violence used by the security forces.
It brings us full circle in the discussion.
Arrest of protesters.
As we're getting near the end of the programme, I have to move it on slightly. So Wael Abbas, Diana there talking about the court case involving the young women, the girls in some cases, the new laws that have come in. What do you think you have to do to get those laws changed?
We have to reform the judiciary. There's no question about reforming it. It should have been done a long time ago. We were calling for reform of justice since 2005. We were calling for independence of justice since 2005. There's a lot of corruption there. The judge who sentenced the girl in Alexandria is a son of a judge. This is part of this issue that we have here. He is also part of Tamarrud and the supporters of Sisi, and he has been photographed and filmed during protests for Tamarrud. A judge shouldn't be involved in that. Also, he's in violation of the law by combining the sentences that we're giving to the girls. It's a violation of the Egyptian law because it's one incident, it's not different incidents. That's why you can't combine the terms and the sentences together.
Okay, I'm going to have to move this to Reda Botros now. Wael Abbas there talking about the fact that the judge was apparently pictured on the back of a motorbike wearing a T-shirt that seemed to support those who overthrew Mohamed Morsi. We don't know what the details of that case, but the suggestion is that the judiciary needs reforming and has done for a long time.
With all due respect to Mr. Wael Abbas, this is a clear violation of the law when you are commenting on a court ruling. That's number one. Number two, when you are talking about video clips in YouTube,
look, I think he's saying it's a bad law. He's saying it's a bad law and a bad judiciary. We don't have much time. Do you think it should change?
There is, in any court ruling, there are the appeal court and later on they can even object to the appeal law. So again, there are 2 levels of litigation after this, and I personally believe that this ruling will be minimized later on, because I think, with my personal view, this is not commenting on any court ruling, that it is a long, and usually in appeal court, the next level of litigation is going to be reduced.
Well, I suppose the point being made is that if you cannot comment on what you consider to be a bad ruling, then you will never get any kind of ruling change, and you will never be able to reform the judiciary. Mr. Botros, we thank you very much indeed. That's Reda Botros talking to us from Cairo. Diana Eltahawy from Amnesty International out of London, and Wael Abbas also in Cairo via Skype. Thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. Do send us your thoughts. Email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net, aljazeera.net. From me, David Foster, and the Inside Story team, thank you for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye for now.